The chandeliers glittered above the ballroom like frozen stars, casting gold light over polished marble floors. Billionaires lounged in velvet chairs, swirling wine worth more than a month's salary for most people. And into that world of power and privilege strode Danielle Hayes, a self-made black CEO, the woman everyone was talking about. She wasn't there to admire the grandeur. She was there for one reason: to finalize a $700 million merger that would transform her company into a global titan. Her determination was palpable, cutting through the air like a knife. But the moment she stepped inside, the laughter shifted. Eyes followed her. Not with respect, but with mockery. It was a clear display of power dynamics. Within minutes, the most powerful family in the room would learn a lesson that no amount of money could buy. Danielle's heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way to the long mahogany table. Every step felt heavier, not because of fear, but because of the weight of their stares. She knew this wasn't going to be easy, being the only black woman in a room full of white billionaires never was. But she had faced worse. The Whitmore family, old money, old power, sat like royalty, waiting for an audience. Their fortunes spanned generations, built on real estate, oil, and influence that had bent politicians to their will. They weren't used to outsiders at their table, and certainly not someone like her. "Ah, Ms. Hayes," the patriarch, Charles Whitmore, said, his voice deep and commanding. He offered a stiff smile, one that never reached his eyes. "So glad you could join us. Please, sit." Danielle nodded politely and took her seat, setting her leather briefcase on the polished table. Around her, the Whitmore sons exchanged smirks, whispering as if she couldn't hear. One of them leaned back casually, swirling his glass of scotch. "Didn't realize CEOs came this young," he said with a grin that wasn't really a compliment. His brother chuckled. "Young and diverse. Quite the resume booster." The table erupted with laughter, some half-hearted, some cruel. Danielle felt the heat rising in her chest, but her face remained calm, unreadable. She had been underestimated her entire life, dismissed in boardrooms, overlooked in deals, doubted at every turn. But that doubt had always fueled her. Tonight, however, it cut deeper. Because this wasn't just business, this was about respect. Charles Whitmore raised his hand to silence his sons. "Enough," he said sharply, though the hint of a smile lingered on his lips. "Let's get down to business. $700 million is no small matter." Danielle folded her hands on the table, her eyes locking on his. She could sign the papers and walk away with the biggest deal of her career. She could ignore the insults, the laughter, the casual racism that dripped from their voices. But a question gnawed at her. What good was a $700 million deal if it cost her dignity? The ballroom seemed even larger now, its vaulted ceiling stretching, like a cathedral of wealth. Golden chandeliers hung above, shimmering against polished marble floors. Every corner of the room whispered of privilege. Rare art on the walls, servers gliding silently with trays of champagne, the quiet hum of conversations from other billionaires gathered for the evening's gala. But at the long mahogany table in the center of it all, the air was heavy. Danielle sat with her back straight, her hands folded neatly on the table, her presence a calm storm against the arrogance that surrounded her. She studied the Whitmores carefully. Charles, the patriarch, wore his age like a badge of authority. Sharp suit, silver hair, the kind of face you'd see on the cover of Fortune magazine. His sons, however, were different. Their suits fit well, their watches glittered with diamonds, but their eyes betrayed entitlement, the smug certainty that the world had already been handed to them. One of them, Brandon, the eldest, leaned forward with a grin. "You know, Ms. Hayes, my father tells us you started from nothing. A garage business. Very impressive. But tell me, what's it like running with the big dogs now?" The question hung in the air, laced with condescension. Danielle tilted her head, slightly, her voice even. It's not about the size of the dog, Mr. Whitmore. It's about the strength of the fight. A few at the table smirked, others shifted uncomfortably. But Brandon wasn't done. He leaned back again, his grin widening. I imagine it must have been quite the journey, especially without the right connections. We, of course, have generations of reputation behind us. Not everyone can walk into a $700 million deal. Danielle's jaw tightened, but she stayed composed. You're right, she said softly. Not everyone can. That's why I'm here. For a fleeting moment, silence. And then came the laughter again. Quick, sharp, cutting. Another son chimed in. Father, maybe she can give us a motivational speech when this is over. Might be good for diversity training. Danielle's stomach churned, but her expression didn't falter. She could see the servers across the room exchanging uneasy glances. Even some of the other investors seated at nearby tables looked away, pretending not to hear. Charles Whitmore finally raised a hand. Enough, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Gentlemen, let's focus. Ms. Hayes is not here for banter. She's here for business. But even then, Danielle caught it, the faint curl of his lips, the quiet satisfaction in his eyes. He wasn't truly correcting them. He was only reining them in. She opened her briefcase and pulled out the contract. This $700 million agreement had taken months to negotiate. She laid it on the table, her pen placed neatly beside it. Her heart should have been racing with anticipation, but instead, it was steady, calm. Because beneath her calm exterior, a storm was brewing. She thought back to where she had come from. The nights she worked in a cramped apartment, coding, until her hands cramped, building her company from nothing. She remembered the rejections, the bankers who laughed at her, the investors who dismissed her because of her skin, her gender, her lack of pedigree. And now here she was, sitting at the table with one of the most powerful families in America, a family that still looked at her and saw nothing more than a checkbox, a punchline. Brandon broke the silence again, swirling his drink lazily. So, Ms. Hayes, tell us, what made you decide we were worth partnering with? Surely it wasn't just the money. Danielle met his eyes. No, she said slowly. It wasn't just the money. It was the idea that we could create something bigger together, something lasting, something that actually mattered. He smirked. Well, that's sweet, but let's be honest. $700 million is enough to make anyone overlook a little discomfort. The words sliced through her. In that moment, Danielle knew what he meant. Overlook the jokes, the arrogance, the disrespect. Overlook who they were so that she could walk away richer. Her pen rested on the contract. All it would take was one signature. $700 million. Generational wealth, influence, power. But she also knew the truth. If she signed this deal, she wouldn't just be giving them her company. She would also be giving them her future. She'd be giving them her dignity. She'd be telling every young, black woman who looked up to her that money mattered more than respect. The room seemed to close in around her. The chandeliers above felt too bright. The laughter, though it had quieted, still rang in her ears. She glanced down at the contract, the ink waiting to be spilled across the paper. And then she looked up, her eyes sweeping across the table of smug, entitled faces. And that's when the decision crystallized. Danielle Hayes didn't come this far to sell her soul for $700 million. The pen lay between her fingers, its sleek gold frame catching the chandelier's light. All eyes were on her now, waiting, expecting, assuming she would bend. After all, who in their right mind would walk away from $700 million? Danielle. Let the silence stretch. She could feel the impatience prickling around the table. One of the Whitmore sons leaned forward, whispering not so quietly to his brother. "She's hesitating." Typical. Danielle placed the pen down gently on the table. The soft click echoed louder than their laughter. She closed the contract folder and slid it back into her leather briefcase with slow, deliberate movements. "Excuse me," Brandon scoffed. "What exactly are you doing?" Danielle rose from her chair, her posture regal, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the air. "I've changed my mind." The room froze. Charles Whitmore's brow furrowed. "Your mind? This is a $700 million agreement, Ms. Hayes. Months of negotiations. You're not walking away." Danielle snapped the briefcase shut. Her eyes locked with his, unwavering. "Oh, but I am." A ripple of disbelief coursed around the table. One of the younger Whitmores actually laughed nervously, thinking it was a bluff. "Come now, Ms. Hayes, don't be dramatic. You can't just—" She cut him off with a single raised hand. "No, what I can't do is sit here listening to your sons mock me, diminish me, and expect me to sign away my hard work as if respect is optional. $700 million might buy you yachts, houses, and more politicians in your pocket, but it doesn't buy me." Gasps. Chairs shifted. The Whitmores exchanged stunned looks, their smirks dissolving into tight jaws. Charles leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away?" Danielle took a step back from the table, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a drumbeat of defiance. She paused at the edge of the room, turned, and delivered the words that would haunt them for years to come. $700 million may mean everything to you, but to me, respect is priceless, and clearly, you can't afford it. The room went silent. Not a whisper, not a cough. Just the weight of her words pressing down like a storm, and with that, Danielle Hayes, the woman they had mocked, belittled, and underestimated, walked out. The night Danielle walked out of that ballroom, the Whitmores were left stunned, their empire momentarily shaken, but the actual storm came the next morning. Headlines blared across every business outlet. Hayes Global walks away from $700 million Whitmore deal. Sources: racism behind collapse of historic merger. Danielle Hayes meets with Whitmore's biggest rival. The story spread like wildfire. Reporters camped outside the Whitmore estate, microphones shoved into cameras, demanding answers. Investors called, panicked. The market stirred. Suddenly, the untouchable Whitmore dynasty looked vulnerable. Meanwhile, Danielle wasn't hiding. She stood before cameras in a crisp black suit, her voice firm and clear. Business is built on trust, and without respect, there is no trust. That's why Hayes Global is moving forward with partners who value both. Those few words hit harder than any lawsuit, any competitor's move. She didn't need to name the Whitmores directly. Everyone already knew. By the end of the week, it was official. Danielle signed a new deal, this time with the Whitmores' most bitter rival, the Lancaster Group. The deal wasn't just bigger than the Whitmores' offer. It was colossal, nearly $1 billion. The press hailed it as a power move, a masterful stroke of strategy. But Danielle hadn't done it for the headlines. She did it because she refused to bow, even when the price tag was $700 million. Back at the Whitmore estate, the mood was darker. At their next shareholder meeting, angry voices filled the hall. "How could you let her walk away?" one demanded. "Do you realize what this has cost us?" Brandon tried to laugh it off, claiming Danielle was too emotional to do serious business. But even his allies didn't smile. The Whitmore name, once a symbol of strength, now carried the sting of scandal. Their arrogance had cost them the deal of the decade, and their humiliation was front-page news. For Danielle, the victory was sweeter than any monetary gain could have been. She hadn't just proven her company's worth, she had proven her own. To every doubter, every gatekeeper, every billionaire who thought they could dismiss her, She had walked into their world, faced their scorn, and walked out stronger. Weeks later, the storm had quieted, but the impact remained. Danielle Hayes wasn't just a CEO anymore. She was a symbol. Young entrepreneurs across the country, especially women and people of color, flooded social media with her story. Hashtags trended. Articles referred to her as the CEO who walked away. To many, she became proof that success wasn't measured only in dollars, but also in courage and determination. One evening, sitting in her office overlooking the city skyline, Danielle finally let herself breathe. The deal with the Lancaster Group was moving smoothly. Her company was stronger than ever, and her employees stood taller knowing they worked for a leader who valued principle above profit. She thought about her younger self, the girl coding, late into the night, rejected by investors, told she didn't belong if only that girl could see her now. Not just wealthy, not just powerful, but free. Free from needing anyone's approval. As the city's lights twinkled below, Danielle whispered to herself, "Respect is priceless." And somewhere, in their mansion of marble and gold, the Whitmores sat in silence, still haunted by the night a woman. They mocked, walked out, and took their legacy with her, because Danielle Hayes hadn't just canceled a $700 million deal. She had redefined what it meant to win.